what is the antidote to cynicism, right? The antidote to cynicism is a point and a purpose. And Joanna Macy, who's a Zen grandmother and, you know, one of the most profound ecologists and activists of her generation, she's described our time in history, right, as being the people of the passage. Like, it is on us to get from here to there. And if you think about the, you know, the settlement of the Western Hemisphere, like arguably through the land bridge, right, between Asia and Alaska, Beringia, right? We are all Beringians now, but in time, not space, right? So where like 15,000 Asian nomads shimmied across that in little boats and, you know, on foot and in the ice ages and various bits and pieces to make it and populate this entire half the world. We're doing that in time. Like, there's a constraint coming. There's a constraint coming, which is how do we transition off this hyper-consumptive, right, techno-industrial, carbon-indulgent civilization, this complex dissipative structure, right, that's creating entropy like nobody's business. How do we navigate that with a bloated population of 8 billion people, half of which would not exist? I mean, half of which happened in my lifetime, right? We went from 4 billion to 8 billion since the 70s. And at the same time, half of the people alive, every single one of those new extra people, only is here because we're using fossil fuels as fertilizers and pesticides. So how do we do this? This is a complex dissipative structure, this energy-hungry civilization that if we stop the energy inputs, collapses. If it collapses, that's curtains for so many of us and so much tragedy and suffering. So how do we leapfrog, right, from this situation to a lower carbon, higher energy, higher efficiency civilization that protects and preserves us? So that's Joanna Macy's question. We're the people of the passage, right? What is ours to do? How do we maintain hope, right? How do we die before we die, right? So that we know our lives are forfeit. I'm no longer just a self-interested little monkey seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. I realize my life is my offering. My life is my gift. So that's step one. Step two, go from living as a fragmented, isolated little potted plant of a deconditioned zoo animal, hyper-neurotic consumer individual, to taking my stand in a stand of community and relations. How do I live 7-generationally? How do I live on behalf of my great-great-grandparents who clearly busted ass to get me this little ember that I've now fanned into a flame? Do I get to say I'm sad or mad or disappointed they didn't give me more? No, they fucking gave me the ember, and I'm now basking in a bonfire. Like, amen. And my 3 generations ahead of me, my children, my children's children, and my children's children's children. How do I live as part of that 7 generations? And then to your point about, does life have a purpose? Does it have a point? It's both, right? Life is both cyclical and endlessly creating and destroying. And that is senseless and amoral and horrifying to contemplate from our point of view, where we care deeply about our little part of things. And it's also accretive. Every single time that cycle of creation and destruction happens, it spits out complexity. It spits out these novel, rare, precious moments, and we can anchor to them by ritual, seeking refuge in ritual, marking the seasons, marking our lives, marking our rites of passage, right? Noticing one of the most profound ones I've seen was just a black and white photo of a Jewish family in Amsterdam in 1941 celebrating Hanukkah. And you're like, oh man, like that was darkness. That was peak darkness of World War II. And there they were, oppressed and hunted. And they were still bearing witness to their lineage's rituals. Think of the Tibetan diaspora. Think of any First Nation peoples that have been relocated. Think of the Rohingya, the Uyghurs, right? The Kurds, you know, the Roma. Like, there are fourth world peoples without a homeland, right? That have been able to persist by carrying their rituals. So this is what it means to be the people of the passage. And if we can do those 3 things, right? If we can die before we die so we know what's ours to give, we can live 7-generationally so that stretches out our sense of, what if I don't get mine now? Oh, it's okay, because I'm doing something on behalf of those yet to be. And we seek refuge in ritual. We anchor the insanity and the constant slipstream towards entropy with, right, observing the passages And then finally, what does that allow us to do? It allows us to leave space for grace. Because none of us know how this is going to turn out. And that's Thanos' pathology, right? Thanos is right up to the point where he is 100% certain of how it's all going to turn out, and therefore that justifies his murderous behavior. We can never be sure. There's a great quote I heard recently, which is, we control nothing. We influence everything. And we have no idea, right, where those ripples will go. So by leaving space for grace, like, do we know how this all turns out? No. None of us could possibly know how it all turns out. But one thing is certain. If we give up hope now, then hope has no chance. If we hold on to radical hope, which is it's not just an adjective or a superlative, it's an academic term from Jonathan Lear at the University of Chicago, who studied 19th century Indian reservations. And radical hope is a specific definition. It's having hope for a future you cannot see from here, but commit to nonetheless. So leaving space for grace, right, is the butterfly effect. Time's soul force at the end of time for all the marbles.